Hello and welcome to the show, The First Steps of God. I have with me PJ and Paul. Welcome back.
Hey.
We are talking about a very important topic, and it's important not just for Christians. It is actually important to set up really civilization and to look back at what has happened in history and what is and why people think the way they do today, and what sort of ideas have been rejected, and why we have some of the problems even we have today, because we have really turned as a society back on some of those great thinkers of the past. It's almost as if anything that's old is to be done away with, but that which is new, that's what we keep looking to. And modern society seems to always want progress, 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 thinking it means letting go of anything that was well thought of in the past and then moving forward all the time. That's certainly in the church and maybe in broader society as well. I'd like us to think a little bit more about the early church fathers' thinking, and how we were just talking about in the last episode about how often they would disagree with each other. Some of those big leaders would disagree with each other, but they were the best of friends. PJ, give us an example.
Well, Jerome and Augustine disagreed loads. So about how God knows things. So for Augustine, he was influenced by the Platonists a lot. So he had this idea where God was had all of creation just before him equally. So he understood everything. All information was just there. Whereas Jerome said, no, that demeans him. He's got all these angels who report things to him, and they know things. So does God know how many gnats there are? It's no, he has an angel in charge of gnats, and that angel's got someone in charge of him. So God knows because he's got this big hierarchy which follows him and does, so that's a point of disagreement. So they were really close friends. They kept writing letters.
That's important for today, because today we've even got to a point in some parts of the world where if you someone thinks you've just offended them, you can even have them arrested or report them. We've got to the point where someone feels offence. It's even debated in some of the law courts. If someone feels offence, that they can maybe get you into trouble. That's bizarre.
There's a core ideological difference which causes that, because now we've got this idea of existentialism, where all you know is yourself and your own opinions and all this sort of thing. So if someone attacks your opinion, it is personal, because if everything is just internal to you and that's all you know.
If you're the most important thing, if all your identity is about you and yourself and your belief and your lifestyle, then anyone who says anything against it, it's as if it's the greatest sin you could have committed. And that is the greatest sin of modern society, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think what's interesting when you read the early church fathers and the medievals as well, because they have this really big thing, which is Jesus Christ, that makes sense of everything, that they can have these really, what we would think are quite fundamental differences, but that's oh no, that's okay, because the big truth is in place and he makes sense of everything, so they can afford to do that. And that way, like you say, even today, even in churches, I'll go to places, and though we apparently seem to have a lot in common, they'll argue with me about some tiny little thing, and then they get really upset and even write things against me because he totally doesn't get this, and I'm like, but what are you talking about? Why can't we just be absolutely captivated with Jesus, and that's the big thing?
And then we don't get all offended and upset all the time. We are able to actually live in peace and harmony with each other, both within Christianity, but with those outside that have nothing in common as far as it comes to faith and religion.
And
Church fathers, I was going to say, wouldn't it be fair to say that they are sort of obsessed with Jesus, really?
Yeah, and then you wouldn't get offended and you wouldn't be caught up in these disagreements if you are obsessed with Jesus, because if someone else is trying to understand Jesus and you're trying to understand Jesus and you make mistakes along the way, it doesn't matter, because you're all towards the same goal. So of course you love hearing other opinions, because it gives you a chance to try and understand Jesus better. So
I love going to church every week, because on a Sunday the first thing we do at church is to look up to the Lord, and the first half of the service is literally just looking up to the Lord and looking to him, getting off our own little issues down here where we're all kind of mixed up and muddled, but looking up to him, and you just find that some of your problems just sort of naturally fall away as a result. Yes, and your identity is not yourself. Your identity becomes all about him.
And with these, the greatest thinkers, you think, when actually modern Christians all around the world want to know, well, what is it to be a Christian? we go back to the creeds and the thinking of the early church fathers. It's almost as if we know we couldn't do that. We're not thinking deeply enough to produce something like the Nicene Creed.
But some people say, so that means that's when your theology, the church made up their theology about the Trinity and about Jesus.
Right.
Maybe just respond to that.
Yeah.
Well, of course, every element in the Nicene Creed you can obviously just find hundreds of years before the Nicene Creed, because like you got Serapion of Antioch talks about the Trinity.
What era?
Oh, he's 2nd century, isn't he? So he's like really, he uses the word Trinity, but of course you can find the concept where you can see Clement and Ignatius refer to Jesus and the Father and Holy Spirit as co-equal and co-God.
Pre-Jesus being born, there's actually thinkers before Jesus was born. Now, notice I say not created, because he wasn't created, he was just born, he always pre-existed. But isn't there thinkers before that were Trinitarian in their thinking?
Yeah, of course. Like there's these Stoic people in particular. They talk about they talk about this like God the Father basically, and the one who like makes the whole universe through the Logos, and they talk about the Logos being equal with him and as eternal. They talk about the Spirit that gives life to the whole of creation, and they say that again equal with the Father and the Logos, and equally that. So they're clearly Trinitarian, and so many Stoics. So like when Mark the Evangelist, when he went to Egypt and found loads of Stoics, they all just joined up to church, loads of these guys.
Because they understood, yes, this is absolutely
and it's because they began with the real world, isn't it? And because they began with the real world, they obviously became Trinitarians.
Well, that's why the Bible says that you look at creation and you're able to understand who God is just from creation.
Isn't it?
And of course you have all of the believers of the Old Testament. Moses, they were all Trinitarian. David.
And I think that's really important, because when you read the Church Fathers, they're so deep into the Trinity and Jesus and in the Old Testament. And when that Nicene Creed was put together, people often don't realise that, because they often go, the Nicene Creed, that's like Constantine imposing an ideology onto church. But if you read them themselves, it's great, because in the Orthodox Study Bible that we have here, and this is like all those Eastern Christians, and you get all these early Church Fathers in here. At the very beginning, when you start in Genesis chapter 1, they'll say, this is the Nicene Creed on page 1. Like the creation of the universe, they'll say, you'll see all the truths of the Nicene Creed in Genesis. And why do they say that? Because they're saying all the people in the Bible would have just said the Nicene Creed. They really were saying, when they put together the Nicene Creed, the Church Fathers were thinking, let us write down what all the writers of the Bible really believed, so that if you believe the Nicene Creed, you will be able to understand the Bible properly, because everyone in the Bible believed it. That's very different than modern people.
I was reading a book on Bibles for the Middle Ages, and it follows that they obviously understood this, that what you've just said, Paul, because they're in that book, of course, the beautiful Middle Ages Bibles are illuminated, and they have these beautiful illustrations before the printing press and so on. And before the book of Psalms, in one of the Psalters, so one of the books of Psalms, they have Jesus on a cross.
Wow.
I thought, that is brilliant.
Beautiful.
They got, those Middle Ages Christians got that the Psalms was about that man who died on a cross. And of course we know in the book of Acts, when they're preaching in that first sermon after they received the Holy Spirit, very, very clearly they talk about David's testimony, David's testimony to the cross, which is absolutely fantastic. I love how they got Jesus through all of the Old Testament.
They really did, and they left that to their medieval successors. The Church Fathers got that, and they left it to their medieval successors, and you do have so many great, like the Orthodox particularly have great pictures of the book of Job. So like there's, when Job's talking to God at the end of the book, and they have Jesus in the whirlwind, and it's just him with the scars and everything, just so you know, it's really
fantastic.
Him talking. They're so good on that.
And that reading early Church Fathers, if you read them for yourself, particularly say Augustine's Confessions, or they're so readable.
They are, definitely. And I was reading
where can you find them? So they're easy. I have the whole series in my library, but not everybody has that. No. Can we access them online?
That same series is available online on New Advent. That's a Catholic organisation. Okay. They've got that, and then
some people might just be, before we wrap up, some people might think, but if they're not from the Catholic tradition, will think, but that's Catholic. But the fact is, what they have is just they have the writing there. You can go read it for yourself, and that's the point we're making. Yeah. Let's go back and read those writings for what they actually said, those original writings. Okay, we'll stop there. Fascinating. Thank you so much. See you next time.